You are listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Chris, and it's once again time for our epic annual countdown, where Saul, Tom, and I will reveal our favorite films from the year that was 2023. So everyone who's listened to one of these before knows the rules, but let's just do a very quick rundown. First, each of us will list the bottom half of our top 10, positions 10 to 6. Pretty quick succession. Then the meat of the discussion will open up as we go into our top 5s, with more and more time dedicated to each film as we climb up to our individual choices for number one film of 2023. And as usual, there's actually no overlaps in films in our top 5s. So we're discussing a full 15 films in this episode. No time to lose, in other words. So let's just get this show on the road, and we can do it in alphabetical order, starting with you, Saul. What does the bottom half of your top 10 look like?
Hi, Chris. Hi, everyone. As we'll talk about more throughout the podcast, 2023 has been a great year for films about teachers, and my number 10 of the year is a film about Miss Novak, the newest teacher at a European school who experiences difficulties with students, staff, and parents. No, the film is not The Teacher's Lounge, though that film may come up later on, but rather Club Zero, the latest film by Jessica Hausner, a challenging and thought-provoking movie that has actually changed the way I do certain things in life. For my number 9, I have the most stressful film of 2023 that Tom has not yet seen, Reality, the Tina Satter film starring a perfectly wide-eyed Sydney Sweeney, who receives a surprise visit from the FBI upon coming home from work one day. Accused of something that she may or may not be guilty of, Sweeney runs a real emotional gamut, while Satter absolutely nails the dread and paranoia of the situation. In 8th spot, I have Scrapper, a British coming-of-age drama about a deadbeat dad who re-emerges in the life of his aspirant, self-sufficient teenage daughter. With nice doses of fantasy and 2 really great lead performances, the film manages to dodge most of the cliches that one tends to expect from strange father-child dramas, to deliver something that always feels real and down-to-earth while also very funny. Number 7 in my books goes to Anatomy of a Fall, the Cannes Palme d'Or winning drama about a woman accused of fatally pushing her husband off a balcony. The movie really milks the uncertainty as to what happened for all that it is worth, while there is also ample dark comedy from all of the crazy modelling made, crash test dummies thrown out of windows and so on, as the prosecution try to make their case. And for number 6, I rather appropriately have Scream 6, which, when push comes to shove, is actually probably my second favourite film of the year, but with the disinterest that both Tom and Chris had in seeing it, I decided to place it as a runner-up instead. The sequel makes such great use of its New York setting, from crowded subways to high-rise apartments, that the sequel even feels like it breathes new life into a franchise that was never once stale to begin with. And it is to my great dismay that Scream 7 will likely never come to fruition with all the casting and firing issues. I absolutely love this franchise, and Part 6 is even better than the very strong 5th film.
All right, that's a nice list of films, and sorry about the being so disinterested in the Scream franchise. So, what about you, Tom? What are your number 10 to 6 favorite films of 2023?
So, at present, I've seen 109 films from 2023, and I've got a top 10 that, for once, I'm really happy with. So in 10th place, we've got Perfect Days, the Wim Wenders film about a Japanese toilet attendant pretty much just going about his day-to-day business. It doesn't sound particularly exciting, but it's a contemplative picture that has lots of moments of cinematic beauty and benefits from his usual simple yet exquisite storytelling. Number 9, we've got Wes Anderson's Asteroid City. Now, It's just the usual Wes Anderson style. If you like his style, you're going to love this. And I think it's his best work since The Grand Budapest Hotel. The desert setting and the sci-fi tropes that he uses in this picture really spoke to me. And it is one of Wes Anderson's best. At number 8, I've got Red Rooms, which is an unsettling Canadian psychological thriller about a model whose obsession with a serial killer leads her down a chilling rabbit hole. The intrigue and mystery surrounding the killer's court appearance and the model's fascination with the case is highly engaging, with the unpredictable storyline taking us on a voyeuristic journey into the unhinged mind of an obsessive individual who plays with fire on the dark web. At number 7, I have a film that also appears in Sol's top 5. So we'll wait and see what that is and talk about it a bit later. And in 6th place, I have May December, which features sublime performances from both Natalie Portman and Julianne Moore. It's not just a brilliant acting showcase, though, but also an enthralling story about a somewhat provocative topic that is well worth seeking out.
Thanks, Tom. I just agree with both of you that 2023 has been a really inspiring year for films where I just really feel excited to check the next film off your watch list. I think it's one of the strongest years in quite some time. And honestly, any of the films in my top 10 could have been in the top 5. It's almost like a 10-way tie. But, something has to hit the cutting block. So my number 10 of the year is the Mexican family drama Totem by Laila Aviles, which places us in the world of a young girl who doesn't understand why she can't see her father on his birthday while all of her extended family hustles around her, seemingly trying to cover something up or struggling with their own emotional well-being. My number 9 is Christian Petzold's A Fire, a Romer-esque vacation film carried by dialogue and a less than pleasant lead who is judging everyone around him, and also leads to some quite, let's say, dark comedy. It just hits a lot of the right notes for me. My number 8 is Justine Triet's Palme d'Or winning Anatomy of a Fall, which captivates you, like I said previously, with its lingering question of guilt and uncertainty. My number 7 is by my compatriot Christopher Borgli in his first American film. It's, of course, Dream Scenario, starring Nicolas Cage as a man who suddenly starts making cameos in people's dreams. One of the world's least interesting men, probably, most ordinary men, is suddenly one of the world's most fascinating men. Eagerly milked by advertising agencies. Definitely a good satire of our time. And finally, my 6th favorite film of the year is the absolutely genius and chilling exploration of the banality of evil, The Zone of Interest, about Rudolf Hess and his family living in relative bliss next to walls of Auschwitz. I don't think I've ever experienced a film quite like this. And that's it. That's our 10th to 6th choices for best film of 2023. So let's just dive right into our top 5s then and get the conversation started properly. Starting with you, Saul. What is your number 5 of the year that was?
As I mentioned earlier on, 2023 has been a really great year for films about teachers. My number 5 film fits into that boat, but I didn't even realize that when I sat down to watch it. The film is Monster, which is the latest film by Hirokazu Koreeda, the Japanese director who gave us Shoplifters, Like Father, Like Son, a few dramas like that. And I didn't really know much about it other than the director and the letterbox poster when I sat down to watch it. So it was really interesting coming in with very minimal expectations, because the way it starts off is you've got this mother who is convinced that her son's teacher is being really unkind to him and physically assaulting him. And you sort of initially think that, oh, it's the teacher who's meant to be the monster in the film. But then around a third of the way through, the film suddenly goes back and replays key events from the teacher's perspective. And then in the final third, we learn even more as things are replayed from the student's perspective. these changes, when they occurred, were a bit confusing at first, but I actually really liked how creator provided no title cards or obvious changes, that the time perspective had shifted, because the film sort of challenges us to properly sift through information like very few of the characters actually do. So I want to keep it as brief as possible, so I'll pass over to you guys. What did you think of Monster?
I thought it was a very good film. I enjoyed the Rashomon-like effect, where you just see things from, like you said, 3 completely different perspectives. You learn more, and it goes in really unexpected ways, to the point that by the time you get to the final act, the story is something completely different than what I was thinking it would be, and the perspective has shifted so much. I didn't absolutely love this film. I thought it could, some of the characters could have been developed a bit more. And I thought it was interesting. Like, you have, for instance, the principal character who has, a lot of presence in the film. It's a really intriguing character, but it's not one of the people who you get the vantage shot from, for instance. But that might also just be a telling of just how well Monster sets up its world and its side gallery.
Like Chris, I really enjoyed the Rashomon-like perspectives that were introduced into the storyline. I thought there was beautiful cinematography throughout, some really nice shots, and it was an unpredictable ride that was very good to, kind of sift through the information, as you said, Sol, and work out what is happening, where this is going to lead to. But unfortunately for me, the story's resolution wasn't as impactful as I was quite expecting from the build-up. I'd say it's one of those films that's more about the journey than the destination. And whilst it is a good journey that I really enjoyed, it was just missing that little something special to make it a favourite in my books, but a very good film nonetheless.
I'm glad you both responded really well to Monster. I'll possibly even agree with you, Tom, that the resolution wasn't the strongest part of the film. I guess for me, what I liked about it quite a lot as a teacher myself is a lot of it felt very down to earth for the teaching profession, especially when the principal cautions the teacher before the parent-teacher meeting to not argue with her, and the idea that what happened doesn't matter any longer because it's all about the perceptions and trying to reach a resolution. So whatever actually happened is sort of trivial to them trying to reach a resolution, which I thought's a very down-to-earth look at the teacher profession. It also sort of reminded me of Anatomy of a Fall in a way, to link to another film in my top 10, where the lawyer says, it doesn't matter what happened, these are the only 2 possible explanations, this is what we have to go through. So to me, yeah, incredibly interesting film, and I'm really glad that you guys responded positively towards it.
Yeah, and I just agree that actually that scene, rather those scenes as it's replayed, are probably the most interesting part of the film for me. So if it had played into that a bit more, rather than, both of you agree that it kind of goes off a little bit in the final act, and I agree with that, it would probably been a great film for me as well. What about you, Tom? What's your number 5 of the year?
My 5th favourite film of 2023 is Femme. It's an anxiety-inducing British revenge thriller about a drag queen who is assaulted in a homophobic attack, only to later become dangerously close to one of their deeply closeted attackers, and a chance encounter brings them together. There are questions of morality as a simmering sexual tension develops between the victim and the assailant, and you're left wondering just how far the protagonist will go in their quest for retribution. George Mackay, who you'll probably remember from 1917, delivers a powerhouse performance as a tempestuous small-town criminal whose volatile nature comes across as incredibly intimidating from the outset. His chemistry with co-star Nathan Stewart Jarrett feels incredibly real, and the interplay between their characters is superb. The ever-shifting power dynamics will likely leave your nerves in tatters and your eyes firmly fixated on the screen, even when it becomes almost unbearable to watch. This is a very intense film. It was a very stressful experience, and for that reason, it was one of my favourites of the year.
Yeah, Femme is also one of my favorites of the year. It's probably my 11th favorite or 12th favorite of the year. I would have loved to place that on my top 10. And frankly, it's one of the most stress-inducing films I have ever experienced. It managed to just spread the line perfectly between hard-hitting character drama and psychological thriller. Like you said, George Mackay is just absolutely fantastic here. The way he manages to imbue this very violent petty criminal with a degree of vulnerability to the point that at some point you actually feel bad for him. Is just incredible. And then on the flip side, it's also just this unnerving presence throughout, because you never know when it's gonna explode. And that's one reason you just can't look away, because like you think at any point things could become violent or even deadly. And that just makes it such an unnerving and psychological experience. It's almost borderline psychological horror. And the premise too is so intriguing, where these two characters start to form this really toxic relationship together, and this plot that underlines it all, which I guess we don't want to spoil since we didn't mention it. But yeah, wow, what a tense film.
This is very interesting about Fem, because I'm the third of you guys to watch it, and I watched it on the back of both of you selling it as a very stressful film. And on the back of that, I did actually find it disappointing. I'm also really glad that Chris didn't tell me that it was a psychological horror film, because if he did, I probably would have found it even more disappointing. Look, I did like the film. I thought it had a lot of good elements to it, but for me, it didn't really work as that intense, stress-inducing experience that you guys had with it. What I found most interesting about it was the parts when the drag queen has to act like a macho man in front of his Bash's friends. There's all this unease that he might be found out, and then you get to the part where he starts to actually enjoy pretending to be all macho. So that, for me, I found really interesting. I didn't really get the sense, though, that violence was about to explode at any moment. When he does get bashed up, it is just the basher who bashes him up. It's not like the others are joining up in or anything. So I guess I never had that sort of sensation that his life would be in danger or anything. Something else which I do want to mention, but look, it's probably not the biggest thing to complain about, because the film is ultimately about more than just revenge. But I thought his revenge plan was really poorly thought out. He gets inspired by watching these revenge porn clips filmed on hidden cameras. He decides, I'm going to film my basher having sex with me and then upload it online. I also thought he managed to seduce the basher with a lot of ease. I mean, I know we do check the basher. We see the basher checking him out early on, so I guess maybe it makes sense. Maybe he's attracted to black men or something like that. I'm not sure. But for me, the whole thing just came together, I guess, a little bit conveniently. And together with the fact that I'd been told that it was a really stressful film, I wasn't really feeling the stress. To me, look, it was a mild disappointment, but I do think there was a lot of interesting things going along there, especially as he started to enjoy being a macho man. As he starts ending up being better friends with his basher's friends than his basher is with his own friends. I thought all that was incredibly interesting, and maybe for the film to work even better for me, that would really be the focus rather than this poorly thought out revenge plot. But look, thanks for the recommendation anyway. Even if I didn't find it stressful, I do think it was a good film.
I can understand where you're coming from with your gripes with the film. For me, I was just drawn in from very early on. The initial attack was intense and it got me hooked into the storyline. I thought a lot of the shots at night were beautifully done. And I think the revenge angle works because, sure, it's not the best revenge plan in the world, but if you've never tried something like this before, you've never had a reason to seek out revenge on someone, you may not come up with the best plan. You may just be driven by rage and emotion that, leads you to take action in a way that perhaps isn't the best thought out plan. And for me, the whole film came together really nicely. I thought it was an intense ride and I was on the edge of my seat throughout. So I can't recommend it enough.
And that brings me to my fifth favorite film of the year, which is All of Us Strangers by Andrew Haigh, which was such an unexpected instant favorite for me. I mean, I figured the film would have great acting and a strong script, and indeed it did. But these phenomenal and tender performances by the entire core cast And I'll name all of them: Andrew Scott, Paul Mescal, Claire Foy, and David Bell. I mean, it's such a powerful quartet, and it also packs so much emotion, even surprisingly funny moments, and managed to convey such a sense of intimacy, vulnerability, memory, and longing that I was just blown away and captivated. It's like a maze, a mystery that plays with the fantastical and allows us to just get the sense of loss and these memories and experiences that could never be but are somehow played out. The atmosphere is incredibly dynamic, at times downright unnerving, borderline scary, and at others it feels like a mellow hug. I also have to give credit for just how unafraid it is to be slow burning and set the scene without us realizing where it's going. It's just such an incredibly touching and striking film, which I don't want to spoil, but it's also really difficult to talk about it in detail without doing so, just because of how unexpected that core premise starts to build up. But let's see if we can manage it. What did you guys think of All of Us Strangers?
I really enjoyed All of Us Strangers. It's probably just lurking outside my top 10 of the year. The two central performances were really electric. I thought they were incredible, and they really sold the story. Like you, Chris, I want to discuss more about the story, but it is one of those films that's better known as little as possible. I'll just say that, you know, the way it deals with memory and the past, it's really touching and it's really moving. And I have to say that there's a final shot that really, really worked well for me. And I was very close to hitting the favourite button on this one. So yeah, there's a lot to like in All of Us Strangers.
I don't even know where to begin with discussing All of Us Strangers. I'm not going to hit all the plot points, but I've been told that I'm in danger of spoiling all the films we're talking about too much today. All of Us Strangers, well, the best part of All of Us Strangers was Andrew Scott's performance. For me, it's one of the best, if not the best, lead performance, or male lead performance, I should say, of the year. Just with so much sadness and visible hurt in his eyes. I thought it was an incredibly powerful performance. I also really like Jamie Bell and Claire Foy, who play his parents. And I don't know how I can say this without spoiling too much about it, but it is hard to work out what's going on at first because they look younger than him. But by the end of the film, it doesn't actually matter. The way that Bell and Foy act towards him, by the end of the film, you're actually convinced they are, in fact, his parents, even though the age stuff at first is a little bit jarring. So the strength of the film for me is really about those performances, and that's what keeps it chugging along. I guess also Paul Mescal's final scene was really thought-provoking and made me rethink about the events of the film from a different way. But that's probably the second big disappointing Paul Mescal performance in a row. For me, the film isn't really about him. The film for me is about Andrew Scott and also the apartment building complex, which is almost completely empty. It's just a really great semi-surreal environment for an incredibly interesting, if not necessarily straightforward film.
I'm really happy you both enjoyed All of Us Strangers as much as you did, even if you didn't love Paul Mescal's performance. So, and yeah, I was hoping for a bit more from him. He's a side character, not a co-lead. So, given all the buzz about him before, I was a little disappointed there, but I still thought he gave a fantastic interpretation of the role. And that brings us up to our fourth favorite films of the year, and we can start again with you, Saul. What are you hiding here?
It's interesting for you to use the word hiding, Chris, because my fourth favorite film of the year is probably the most obscure film that I'm going to talk about. Although with your art house sensibilities, Chris, you probably have more obscurities overall. But the film is an Italian film called The Last Night of Amore, and it's a film that I saw during an Italian film festival in Perth way back halfway through 2023. Hasn't got a very wide release yet, but it's a film that I think might end up taking on just because of the structure of it. Incredibly interesting. It starts off about an honest cop's retirement party and getting interrupted by the news that his longtime partner was killed in a violent shooting. But not everything is as it initially seems to be. So it's very intense as he leaves his party and he breaks down and seeing his partner's dead body in the middle of the freeway. But after this point, the film eventually flashes back to several days earlier and looks at the events leading up to that. And once the flashbacks reach the fatal evening, things get incredibly interesting. There's a lot of paranoia there in the air as the cop and his partner get worried about being followed. And there's a really great pulsating, giallo-like semi-vocal music score that adds oodles of atmosphere. And the film really gets interesting for me when we start to see the events of the start of the movie replayed from different angles with more information. So it's like we see it earlier on and then we see it recontextualized afterwards. And that narrative structure for me made it really stand out as a very different and very worthwhile movie, worth seeking out if you can find it. What did you guys think of the film?
So I think my reaction to Last Night of Amore was very similar to yours with Femsol. You'd sold this to me as like a stressful thriller, and to be honest, I didn't really get that and was quite disappointed. I agree that the soundtrack is a really strong point in the film. The start was brilliant, a drone shot hovering over the city at night, and the music really set the mood and the atmosphere. But I felt like the film went on a bit long. I didn't see that the revisiting the events of the night from different perspectives added enough to really make it worthwhile. I think it could have been condensed into a smaller, tighter film, which would have perhaps enhanced the intensity rather than seeing it from different angles. I didn't really buy much of the protagonist's actions, kind of similar to where you were picking holes in Femme. I think maybe just because I wasn't grabbed as much by the film, I was kind of, picking out holes and stuff instead of just going along with the ride. So it was okay, but it'd be interesting if any of our listeners want to check out Femme and Last Night of Amore and see which one they find the more stressful. Let us know.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll leave this at a tie because, I thought Femme was more stressful. But Last Night of Amore was quite stressful to me as well. And for me, it was a film that really, it had a okay opening and decent-ish ending. But to me, what really sells this film is like this mid-section, which feels really, really stressful. I don't want to spoil too much about it, but you essentially have probably 40 minutes in the tunnel where his partner was killed. And it lingers there and it's tense and there's so many different characters in the mix. And that, to me, it felt like that could have been almost the whole movie if they had expanded that or cut a lot of the rest. I would have been much more drawn in because, like Tom, I didn't really buy all of the actions of the protagonist. I thought a lot of the flashbacks leading up to that was just so. Didn't really buy the criminal subplot that well. It's good, but it wasn't striking or anything. And then suddenly you get this kind of main piece of the film that really sold it for me. And then it kind of moved back to being a bit less believable to me in the end as well. But it's a very good film. It is stressful, and as far as the thrillers go, it's easy to recommend. It's a good recommendation.
Thanks, Chris. I'm glad to know that you liked the film, even though you had some issues with it. And Tom, it's very interesting about you with this one and me with Femme and the way that we each mismarketed it to ourselves. I think your challenge to our listeners is amazing. If you find a dedicated thread for this episode on icmforum.com, please drop us a line and let us know if you found Femme or Amore more stressful. Obviously, you know where I side on that issue. I'm also really happy, Tom, that you did mention the overhead drone photography because I thought that was great. I thought it also showed how insignificant the characters were in the big corrupt world that was out there. But probably the biggest thing for me was just how big a surprise it was. It was just a film that, there were a couple of good reviews on Letterboxd about it. happened to be showing a convenient time at the film festival. I'm just like, well, I'm going to take a chance. And I wasn't expecting to be blown away, so probably just having such few expectations really helped. The other thing which I think did help was that narrative structure and revisiting events from other perspectives. And I seem to have a bit of a running theme going on at the moment, because that's sort of the way that Monster worked, that we sort of see the same events replayed from 3 different perspectives. And over here in Amore, you actually see the events replayed from different perspectives as well. So I'm wondering if I keep that running theme throughout the rest of my top 3. I think I can for at least one film. So actually, I think 2 films. Okay, this is going to be very interesting to discuss.
And what about you, Tom? Are you hiding? Well, actually, I know you're hiding a bit of a hidden gem in your fourth spot too, and it's one I'm proud to say I recommended to you. So present it.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing this to my attention, Chris. I wasn't sure what to expect, but it worked tremendously well for me. So I'm really happy you did. My 4th favourite film of the year is Green Border. Now, Green Border offers a haunting expose on the harrowing situation faced by those trying to cross the Polish-Belarusian border, as well as examining the predicaments of corrupt border guards and those trying to aid refugees as they attempt to start a new life in the European Union. It showcases the ugly side of humanity with numerous shocking gut punches that left me reeling due to its stark and realistic depiction of the treatment of people who find themselves trapped in a violent and unforgiving cycle of pain and suffering at the border. Director Agnieszka Holland's bold critique of those involved in nefarious tactics to exploit refugees seeking a better life makes for powerful viewing, which is probably why her heartbreaking film resonated so well with me. Its stark black and white visuals enhance the feeling of despair as we accompany a family of refugees on their soul-destroying journey, an unforgettable journey that will inevitably stay with you long after the credits are rolling. This is an important story that demands your attention and is likely to stir up powerful emotions of anger and sadness, with Green Border being a superb example of a politically charged film that also offers an enthralling narrative. What did you guys think of Green Border?
Yeah, I've really enjoyed Green Border as well. And as soon as I saw it, I thought, yeah, this is the kind of stress-inducing film that Tom will immediately be attracted to. I think the most striking image the film left me was this kind of circle of terror that the refugee experience as they're stuck between the Belarusian and Polish border. And neither side wants them, and they're just put in a purgatory of being chased back and forth. It's terrifying, it's awful, it almost brings me back to Come and See. It's just that visceral. And it also plays in with some of Saul's favorite tendencies in his previous films here, so let's see how he responds to it, with just how it kind of shows things from different perspectives. It's divided into chapters where you see the point of view from the refugees, see the point of view from the border guards, you see the point of view from the activists trying to help the refugees. And that makes it really interesting, though to me, the most intriguing and the most powerful was being with the refugees. I thought the film lost a bit of its intensity after that. And I also thought it lacked a little bit of nuance, and it had some simple writing here and there. But yeah, it's a truly powerful film, and I'm really glad you chose to promote it in your top 5, Tom.
So I would agree with you, Chris, that the film does get less intense after the refugee section, but I did actually like the way that it changed, because it was getting to around half an hour in. I had entered this film with absolutely zero expectations. All that I basically knew about was it was about a humanitarian conflict. I knew that it was sort of about the border of Belarus and Poland. I didn't know much else about it. I was getting to around 25 minutes, 30 minutes in, and there's a point where these border guards snatch the money off the refugees and then pour out the drinking water that they paid €50 for. And at that point, I thought, I can't watch 2 more hours of this, because the film's 2.5 hours long. I thought, I can't believe Tom's put a 2.5 hour torture porn film in his top 5 for the year. But then after that half-hour mark, or after about 35 minutes, the film does change, and it gives us these other 2 perspectives. One from the perspective of the border guards, and the second one from the perspective of humanitarian rescue workers. It's interesting that Chris found the immigrants' perspective to be the most interesting, because for me, the most interesting by far was the perspectives of the border force soldiers, in particular one soldier who has got a pregnant wife and has got greater things on his mind. Because he's the one character who actually wrestles a little bit with what he's being told, we see all these really intense indoctrination scenes where the border guards are told that the refugees aren't people, they're the weapons of Putin and Lukashenko, and it was really interesting seeing this security guard's perspective. I'm not going to spoil some stuff because I've already spoiled so many films in this podcast already, potentially. But for me, that's where the heart and soul of the film really lied. And I guess for me, the disappointment was the film wasn't more about that, and it was sort of equally split between the humanitarians, the immigrants, and the border force guards. But yeah, incredibly interesting film, and definitely for me, this is more stressful than film. So I'd say, yes, this one does work as a stressor film, and not quite the misery porn. I said torture porn earlier on. I meant misery porn. Not quite the misery porn film that it seemed to be early on, based on that initial first half hour.
After hearing your feedback, Sol, it sounds like it's the perfect amalgamation of our preferences, really, because it's, relentlessly bleak and harrowing and stressful, which obviously appeals to me. But then we've also got the different perspectives as well of all the participants involved in the crisis. So it's a nice amalgamation of the two things that we've been talking about so far. And I think it works incredibly well, both as a stressful film and just a film with a powerful message that really hit home and made me think a lot after it. So a lot of food for thought here, and also just a great cinematic journey. So I hope people enjoy watching Green Border, although maybe enjoying it is the wrong word. But regardless, I hope people seek it out and get something from it.
Yeah, definitely. I would strongly recommend it as well. And that takes me to my own fourth favorite film of 2023. 20,000 Species of Beasts, which is actually the feature debut of Spanish director, and I'm going to butcher this name, Estibaliz Urresola Tulogren. It tells the story of a young trans girl spending the summer with her extended family in the country and realizing who she is, much to the confusion and frustration of her family. It feels incredibly intimate, and I love the way the camera is just alive and very much puts us into the world of our protagonist. I couldn't help but think of one of my all-time personal favorites, Summer 1993. But while the setting and cinema is similar, the mother-daughter dynamic, which is one of the things that really sets this film apart, where it, without being judgmental, shows how the family is dealing with their child not conforming to gender expectations in this raw, intriguing, and human way. It can be very difficult probably to see for people who are trans themselves, because there's a lot of dead naming involved, and it's just the family not really even understanding that she's trans for a very, very long time. But it culminates in this very powerful emotional climax that left me very emotionally satisfied. So it's definitely a film I would strongly recommend.
20,000 Species of Bees was a really great film. It might even be my favorite of the films in Chris's top 5 for the year. I really, as a teacher, as somebody who works with kids, I really go for films that have really realistic and down-to-earth child performances. And Sophia Otero, who became the youngest ever acting winner at Berlin, was just amazing in the lead role. From all her small nervous looks to her slow and careful walking, especially when in swimwear, we really get a sense of how body conscious she is without having to say anything out loud. And yes, the film's a trans tale, but for me it was more than just a trans tale, because it's also a tale about her being afraid of disappointing and alienating her new friends that she's making while on vacation. So it's sort of, she's going away to a vacation spot, doesn't have to have any preconceptions about what gender she is. She's trying to make new friends and she doesn't want to disappoint them. So for me, that's very universal beyond the trans stuff. What I did find a bit disappointing about the film is all the scenes without Otero in there. Yes, I understand that part of the tale is about her mother overcoming her prejudices about her daughter's gender. So I understand that's part of the tale, but for me, that's not really where the heart of the story is. The heart of the story is about the lead actress and about her realizing her gender and trying to make friends and everything. So I sort of switched off from the film a little bit when it sort of tended to focus on the mother. So for me, more focus on the daughter would have made it an even stronger film. But even so, I thought it was a really great film that had a lot to it, even beyond just being a trans tale.
I have to echo what Chris and Sol have said there. It's a brilliant film with a superb central performance. If anything, it's quite staggering because the lead actress's performance is just phenomenal. The film itself carries a really strong message, and it depicts the subject matter quite sensitively. And there was a lot of interesting things in there surrounding bees that I was hoping the film would have delved into a bit more, really. I never knew that bees were used as a herbal remedy as such to treat ailments, and I wish we'd have learned a bit more about that. Also, the depiction of the countryside was beautiful. There was some great settings, and yeah, this was a powerful story that I think will speak to anyone, regardless of whether it's a topic that is close to your heart or not.
Maybe you can reach out to Solgren and ask her to do a sequel that's more focused on the bees.
Yeah, let's do it. I want to see that. 20,001 species of bees, it'll be called.
All right, then that brings us up to our top 3, and you can kick it off again, Sol. What's your third favorite film of the year?
As I've mentioned a couple of times, 2023 has been a great year for films about teachers. And my third film is the second film after Club Zero that's actually got a main character called Miss Novak, who has started teaching at a new school where things start to go wrong. And this film is The Teacher's Lounge. I didn't know much about the film going into it. I saw it way before the Oscar nominations came out. All I knew that it won the German Lola Award for Best Film, and Chris said, "You're a teacher, Sol, you might like this." And I thought, oh yeah, right, because half or more than half the teaching films out there aren't very realistic. This film really was. It's about a teacher who puts a video recording on a laptop, and it appears to show somebody else at her school stealing from her jacket pocket. And that video starts an unstoppable chain reaction when she confronts the apparent perpetrator. The lead actress is just sensational in here as her world slowly unravels around her, as her principal insists on referring the matter to the police, while policy dictates that the other staff member has to be suspended, none of which she wanted. Worst of all, she actually finds herself accused of a wrongdoing by recording things in the staff room without permission in the first place, and things get even more complicated by the fact that she teaches the accused sons, which leads to behavioural issues and unrest in class. With all the shaky camera work and a tingling music score, the film really captured her dreaded uncertainty really, really well. And for me, this is mostly a film about the dread that she experiences when she feels everybody else is turning against her. Video recording issues in school are really real, and it's actually one of the main reasons why bathrooms at schools get heavily vandalized, because we're actually legally not allowed to have security cameras in bathrooms because you're not allowed to be filming kids. So for me, the whole idea of the video recording is a very realistic concern. And I guess for me, it was just incredibly down-to-earth film. And it does have a final scene, which seems to be the most controversial, the most debated point about the film. But the more I've thought about it, the final scene does sort of work for me, even though it did throw it off for me the first time around, or when I finished watching the film. What did you guys make of The Teacher's Lounge?
I loved The Teacher's Lounge. It's just outside my top 10, and if it hadn't been for that ending, it probably would have been in my top 10. It's still not ending, but it was just it's a bit confusing just what tone the director really wants to set there. I also thought it was really stressful with all of the shaky cams and just our central leads kind of semi-paranoia in a way, but also the fact that it's it's justified paranoia because everyone do start to turn against her, and she's just it's just a film that just kind of touches your heart a bit because she just goes in with all the right intention. She wants to be this great teacher. She wants to help all the kids. She doesn't want anything to go wrong, but she does these small wrong steps that she doesn't think about at the time, and it just all blows up in her face. And we just follow the film as essentially her life at the school becomes more and more unraveled, and that's just such an intense and incredible experience to witness. So really glad we got to put some focus on this film here. So
I also really enjoyed the Teacher's Lounge. You really feel for the protagonist in this situation because, as you said, Chris, you know, she's trying to do all the right things to get the situation resolved in an amicable manner. And, you know, just these small missteps that lead to even worse consequences as the situation spirals out of control. And it's, you know, just these small misunderstandings that lead to greater difficulties. And we've all been in situations where, you know, people will perhaps pass judgment, they've not got the full picture, and it leads to worse things happening. And it's a very relatable situation. And the way that it is presented here and the way that it is filmed, it's very realistic and really brings you in on an emotional level. Again, I think it is another film that is quite stressful because of how much you feel for the protagonist. So we have got a raft of stressful films in our top fives, and that's great by my books.
Great to hear your positive takes, guys. This seems to be my least divisive film so far in my top five. What you said, Tom, about not having the full picture, yes, it actually sort of relates a little bit to Monster, the other teacher film that I've mentioned so far. And also the different perspectives, also Last Night of Amore, and I guess we're not quite seeing events replayed, but we sort of don't quite have the full picture. And there's also a little bit of uncertainty in there, even with the evidence that is captured in the video. There are still a little bit of doubt in there, which makes it really interesting. And as Chris said, it's not just a paranoia tale, it's a justified paranoia tale, which for me makes it so much better and so much more enticing.
I couldn't agree more. And what about you, Tom? What's your third favorite film of the year?
My third favourite film of the year is a film that took me totally by surprise, and it is The Creator. Now, big budget original science fiction films are few and far between, so I was incredibly excited when I found out that Gareth Edwards, the director of Monsters, Godzilla and Rogue One, was helming an original story set in the near future during a war between humans and robots, but I didn't have any idea that it was going to be as great as it was. As well as presenting a topical idea that resonates well with audiences due to the rising trend of AI, Edwards infuses his vision with inventive visuals that present an immersive depiction of what our future could look like and the challenges that humanity could face if AI ever became a threat to our existence. The special effects and cinematography are impressive, but never too intrusive, and the storyline pulls you in emotionally thanks to the delightful performance of Madeleine Yuna Voiles as a robotic child. John David Washington appears alongside newcomer Yoyles and proves once again that he is a strong leading man, with his protagonist providing a fresh spin on the reluctant hero with a tragic backstory. The world building is undoubtedly one of the film's highlights, but I was also utterly enthralled by the storytelling, with the film's revelatory final moments leaving me in both turmoil and also amazement at the grand spectacle and show. This is a plea to all film studios. Please give Gareth Edwards more money so he can do whatever the hell he wants with his next original outing.
I guess I'll respond first because Tom started by saying that The Creator took him by surprise. It took me by surprise also, but in the worst possible way. For me, I was entering the film as a sci-fi fan, and for me, I'd have to say the film barely registered to me as a sci-fi movie. It's actually the point where Tom looked it up on IMDb and somebody had removed the sci-fi tag, and it wasn't me, but I'm like, good, because, I mean, yes, you have got the fact that it's set in the future, and yes, you've got a kid machine. the child weapon or whatever it is has the ability to turn off any machine, but the film was mainly focused on John David Washington bonding with the kid, and for me it really came off as a melodrama with scattered action and adventure along the way. The non-green screen was a really interesting novelty in there, and the big beams of light coming down from above I thought was a really cool effect. But as a sci-fi fan, I enjoy hard sci-fi. And for me, this is extremely soft sci-fi in the most underwhelming way. For me, the film felt very cookie cutter. It barely scratched the surface of artificial AI, the Spielberg film, in terms of whether robot kids can have real hopes and dreams. And 40 years on from the Terminator, I thought, well, there's only so much that can be done from a war against machines scenario, which has, since the Terminator has come out, has become such a sci-fi staple. So, I mean, I like the idea of donating one's likeness to AI technology. To me, that was really interesting, but that was always in the backdrop for this, unfortunately, what came off to me as a little bit of a melodrama. So, a disappointment for me, but probably the only film in Tom's top 5 that I didn't like.
It's a shame that you didn't like it, Sol, but I can understand why you don't like it and your reasons behind that, because I do know that you prefer hard sci-fi and you're not necessarily as interested in films that have sci-fi setting as a backdrop to their storytelling, which is what the creator is. You know, it doesn't set out to be something like Primer or 2001 or something where it looks at these grand philosophical ideas in detail. It is, you know, as you said, a bit of an adventure action storytelling with sci-fi elements. And those sci-fi elements bring a lot to the table and enhance the story. And for me, it really worked. So as long as you're not expecting a sci-fi that plunges into all these ideas in great detail, then you may be surprised at how fun and how entertaining the ride is here. So yeah, don't be put off by Sol's view, but maybe if it tempers your expectations, if you're more into hard sci-fi, you'll have a better ride with it. So what did you think of the creator, Chris?
So yeah, like you, Tom, I really enjoyed the look of the creator. I mean, the world that Gareth Edwards managed to create here is really stunning, and I just love these kind of images of merging nature and technology the way it did. It was something that's rarely been seen like that. A really cool and exciting kind of fresh look. Where I did not like the creator is where I also did not like Rogue One. I should say that Rogue One is the best recent Star Wars film, but it had this issue where a lot of the characters just felt expendable and you didn't care about them that much. And that's very similar to how I thought about this film. I thought it was fairly well plotted, but I thought that the characters were thin, and in the end I didn't really care that much about their individual destinies. But it's a very good film, and as far as, you know, sci-fi action goes, I mean, this is quite top of the line, really, in terms of the mainstream. So definitely a very good recommendation, Tom.
I'm really glad you enjoyed it, Chris. And I suppose why it worked so well for me is that I was actually invested in the characters. So the ending really packed a punch, and when I left the cinema for this one, I remember just being in a daze for half an hour, just wandering the streets of Manchester with like all kinds of thoughts wandering through my head. It was a great cinematic experience, so good on the big screen. And yeah, I hope that other people seek this out.
And that brings us to my third favorite film, which is actually rather Judas. Do not expect too much from the end of the world, which should surprise regular listeners, as Judas tends to top my top 10s every time we do one of these episodes, but this time it's just down there at number 3, but it's still a masterpiece with a really unique look. It's shot on 16mm black and white film and then processed to look extra grainy and grungy and lo-fi. This was not quite what I was expecting going in, and it took me a little while to warm up to it. Mainly that's because I tend to be really visual driven, and this kind of ugly, repetitive world wasn't quite it for me, especially when, you know, our lead, this woman working her ass off, just driving around as an assistant kind of takes these breaks into her TikTok alter ego with this just really bad visual effect, where she kind of morphs herself into some kind of lookalike of Andrew Tate and just spews hyper misogynist BS for fun. It's fun, but the look is bad. But after a while, you kind of just learn that okay, this kind of bad off look. There's something really raw and exciting about that. It just feels like extra vulgar, and it suits the black comedy well. I mean, this is a film that even manages to get the famed bad movie director Uwe Ball for an extended cameo as himself, and it's just really, really fun to see. And the comedy in general is very much what you come to expect from Uwe. Really flawed characters and just shots being fired in every direction, stabbing at society as a whole. I mean, the people who are taken advantage of by foreign companies, for instance, and will be lamenting power structures and inequities and just a rotten deal in life, will, for instance, spout abuse at non-white immigrants or, random conspiracy theories and all kinds of other nonsense. And I haven't even mentioned the fact that the film is also in the conversation with a real Romanian film from the 80s about a woman driving a cab, which is intercut with our lead driving her car, and there's random every man for himself style slow motion. That was one of the things that drew it down for me, but there is a payoff here, and so many of the things you don't think there will be payoffs for early on comes into play later. And while in some ways it feels very familiar to a lot of what Yuda has done before, this is like with Bad Luck Banging, a film where he really just dives into modern life, company structures, work life, the gig economy, and he just does a great job creating this huge canvas of messy society that could indeed feel a bit like the end of a world, a whimper, not a bang, so to say.
Chris was very pleased to find out that this is my favourite of all of the Roddy Uda films I've seen so far. Having said that, it's still nothing amazing. His style of filmmaking doesn't really work for me, but this is the one that I've managed to get the most out of so far. The pitch black humour really struck a chord with me. There was some very funny moments in there. I also have to say that the director cameo was also a very pleasant surprise, and I found that really amusing. Wasn't expecting to see him in the film at all. The problem for the film with me was the old Romanian film that was intercut. Although it had a part to play in the story, I didn't feel it really offered much aside the main narrative. It felt like a subplot that was a little unnecessary, really, and the film could have been tighter and more effective without it. The final scene was actually really good, with a static camera shot and lots of food for thought about the condition of the workers there. And I think that if Uda continues in this vein, I will be willing to carry on watching his films. Chris's endorsement of them is what keeps me coming back. Otherwise, I probably would have bowed out a long while ago. But there is something in there, and as this one worked quite well for me, I think if you've been disappointed or kind of bemused about what's so special with his previous films, it would be worth giving this one a shot, because even if the whole film overall didn't really gel with me, there were lots of moments that stood out and did make an impression. So yeah, this is certainly worth a shot with tempered expectations.
Thanks, Don. I'm glad I even managed to keep forcing you to see this. And this time I gave Saul a pass. He didn't have to sit through a near 3-hour film of knowing that Uda doesn't always work for him. But I'm glad you guys keep making the effort. And after Bad Luck Banging and his increased exposure, it's really nice to just see more and more people showing up for his films as well. I mean, I've been shouting his praises for a very long time now, and I'm glad that the art house scene at least is catching up a little bit there. And let's see how the fans he gained from Bad Luck Banging will feel about this one. It's gotten some good feedback so far, so very happy about that. And this brings us to our number 2s of the year. So once again, Saul, what's your second favorite?
Anyone who knows me knows that I'm a big fan of David Cronenberg. What people might not know is that I'm actually not a big fan of Brandon Cronenberg. His first film, Antiviral, didn't really work for me. It really fell short in the world-building department, and I just couldn't get on the plane that the characters existed in. And Possessor, I thought, was an improvement, but I didn't really love it as much as everybody else loved it. So when I went into Infinity Pool, I went into it with very tempered expectations, and to me, it's actually by far his best film to date. I thought Possessor was a big improvement over Antiviral, and for me, Infinity Pool is an amazing, just as big an improvement over Possessor. It does feel a bit short in its world-building department as well, but for me, understanding all the finer plot details about Infinity Pool isn't necessary to appreciate how well the film taps into the protagonist's anxieties and his insecurities as he caves into peer pressure and finds himself in a Kafkaesque bureaucratic dilemma in a foreign land where not all the laws make sense to him. He is vacationing in a fictitious Mediterranean country. He's got writer's block, and he experiences horrors which are best left unspoiled. And I really don't want to mention too much about the film, except to say that it really lulls us to a false sense of security because we start off in this resort, and then he eventually ventures out where he's told he's not meant to go, and we see all the barbed wire and security fencing that's outside his hotel, and it really makes us reconsider how things are going. The majority of the films is a very big audiovisual assault on the senses, lots of hallucinatory montage sequences, pitch-perfect bursts of music, very daunting close-ups that show facial imperfection, and just some really great, dizzying, upside-down photography too. For me, it was just an amazing assault on the senses, and even though I don't really understand everything that happened plot-wise, it's just such a great audiovisual experience that I'll be happy to go back and revisit this one shortly down the track. What did you guys think of Infinity Pool?
I think my views are quite similar to yours here, Sol. You'll be pleased to know. Whilst I didn't really like Antibodies, Possessor did feel like a step in the right direction, and it certainly feels like Brandon Cronenberg has really found his feet now with Infinity Pool and really hit his stride, because I enjoyed this a lot. There's some striking horror visuals, great mysterious storyline, very perverse and hedonistic and quite explicit, particularly in some of the montages that you mentioned. I really liked the masks that were used in the film. There's some quite unsettling imagery there that could trigger some people, and it was very effective. Overall, it was a really unsettling mind trip, and I think horror fans looking for something different from the genre are going to have a lot of fun with this one, because it's very out there and it works really well.
I think you can take my views on this film with a bit of a grain of salt, because this is really not my type of film, and I came into it with a lot of trepidation. The good news is that I liked it a lot more than I thought I would. In large part due to Alexander Skarsgård's charisma. He's just perfect for this role. He manages to be both pitiful and loathsome at the same time. I also really enjoyed the mask that Tom mentioned, and as Saul said, the fact that it actually has this kind of realness to it. I read that Cronenberg actually inspired the film on a real life experience he had of going to a resort like this and just seeing poverty outside, and just the stark contrast. And I think he manages to build that into the film really well, and just taking this idea of a poor country, making exceptions for foreigners, into a more extreme sci-fi twist. My main issue here is that I didn't fully buy the central concept, which I don't want to spoil. It worked for me, but I didn't fully buy it. I wasn't fully in it, and I thought most of the side gallery, besides Mia Goth, was a bit forgettable. But yeah, it's a slow-burning horror film that just spirals out of control. It's tense. It's also things that I know Tom and Saul love. So if this is the kind of film that you like, it's definitely a film everyone in that kind of niche should seek out.
I'm glad to hear the positive response from Tom and the positive with reservations from Chris. I did have a few issues with the sci-fi stuff that we're not spoiling. I guess mainly because it is such a poor country and yet they're capable of doing this. That to me didn't quite feel right. But I love what you mentioned in terms of being a foreign land and the idea that the tourists are sort of segregated from all the poverty that's actually going on within the country otherwise. Yeah, incredibly interesting experience. Amazing big screen experience. And I hope for me, when I rewatch it, it works just as well on the small screen.
Right, and what about you, Tom? What's your second favorite film of the year?
So my second favourite film of the year is Alexander Payne's The Holdovers. Now in The Holdovers, the premise is simple yet engaging, and it sees several neglected children forced to remain at their boarding school with a curmudgeonly teacher over the Christmas break. A 70s setting aids the story, with the teens being disconnected from the outside world without a mobile phone in sight, as well as informing the film stylistically, with Payne embracing a 70s throwback aesthetic in both form and technique. Paul Giamatti takes centre stage as Mr. Hunnam and delivers a sublime performance opposite impressive newcomer Dominic Sessa as Angus, the disaffected youth who causes Mr. Hunnam a lot of grief during the time together. Their rich characterisations provide the story with a surprising amount of heart and a lot of humour as the two forge an unlikely friendship upon learning that they have much more in common than either would initially suspect. The Holdovers comes close to rivaling Nebraska as Payne's greatest work to date, and I can see myself returning to its delights frequently, as it is an inviting picture with characters who are flawed, yet very human, making it easy to empathise with them. It's a subdued picture where almost every story beat is there to drive the catharsis of the two leads, and I would happily watch another hour of their amusing interactions. This was another great hit for me from Payne, and I'm very excited to see what he delivers for us next.
I really enjoyed The Holdovers also, and it's actually great to meet somebody else who thinks that Nebraska is Alexander Payne's best film or possible best film, because I often seem to be a bit alone in that camp. I don't know if I'd quite put Holdovers in the same level as Election and Sideways, but for me it'll probably be either his fourth or fifth best film. After a couple of disappointments, I actually was quite impressed with it because I didn't think too much of Downsizing or The Descendants, but for me this was a really great, really grounded film. Poor Giamatti, as you said, Tom, incredibly great performance. I won't spoil his final scene, but what he sort of says in there, really sort of lingered with me, and I'm really sad he didn't win the Oscar for it. The dialogue in the film is amazingly witty and quotable, thanks to the fact that both protagonists are both unappreciated, undervalued geniuses. And just really great vibes with the film. And as I said before, it's been a great year for films about teachers. And for me, this just also hits the mark as a very realistic approach to the profession. So it was definitely a film that from very early on I could tell that I was going to love it, and I did love it also.
I'll just join the praise then. This is a film that really is carried by performances and the script, but Paul Giamatti is just fantastic in this film. And then you have this, new discovery in Dominic Sessa and Davin Joy Randolph as well, all delivering strong performances as outsiders. The only thing really holding it back from favorite for me is just how familiar it felt. But I think that's also one of the strengths the film has in just being very accessible, playing with very familiar tropes of the grumpy professor and the slightly rebellious, quirky teen, and really just delivering on funny dialogue, emotion. And one of the things that's probably most impressive in this film, and it's not talked about enough, is just how well Payne manages to bring out the 70s aesthetic. It really feels like the 70s, and in some ways it almost feels like a film from the 70s. It's just so believable. It can almost feel like you're there. It just has that really lived in atmosphere, and I thought that was very, very impressive.
I'm really glad that you both enjoyed The Holdovers. And I think it's worth mentioning, we haven't actually discussed Davine Joy Randolph's performance that won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress. I love the interplay between her and Giamatti, and it's great to see this unconventional family unit at play. They're like a group of people that you wouldn't put together normally, but they fit together so well in the Holdovers, and it's the kind of people that you'd just be happy to hang out with, talking about nothing all day long, and you know that it would be a good time. So it's one of those films that feels like a joy to watch because of the characters, are just really relatable, down-to-earth people with a lot to offer, despite all of their flaws as well. So yeah, I hope that other people are as excited to watch The Holdovers as we were if they've not seen it yet, and I hope you get a lot from it.
All right, so my third film is a film I know Tom hasn't seen because he hates documentaries, but it's not quite a documentary. It's somewhere in between. It's Orlando, My Political Biography by Paul B. Preciado. And it is just a joy to watch. It's tongue-in-cheek, playful, meta, lovingly theatrical, and simultaneously blending an adaptation of the book itself while exploring trans and non-binary experiences today. It starts, interestingly, with the director saying at the very beginning, when people ask me why I don't write my biography, I tell them it was written in 1928. But it is not just Preciado's biography or his experience of transitioning and being a trans man, or indeed a straight adaptation. Across the film, we're introduced to new actors, each presenting themselves and reciting, and in this film, I will be playing Orlando by Virginia Woolf. Secondary characters do the same for their roles, and what could feel a bit repetitive ends up feeling like an energetic burst, a change, as well as a humorous wink, but more so a battle cry and a sense of communal identification. One of the most ingenious ideas in this film is to have the Orlandos interviewed, switching between the role of Orlando and themselves. And often we don't even realize who they're speaking as. That's how blended the experience of Orlando, the character in this 1928 novel, is with trans non-binary experiences today, and that's just so interesting to explore. In fact, I would say that the film manages to be extremely rare in today's cinematic space. Just an exploration and expression of trans non-binary joy, while touching on heavy themes. Each participant, young or old, get to be in the spotlight, take a character they identify with, and just play it their way. You can just tell how much fun everyone's having, and it's contagious. While this really plays to my taste in terms of just Brechtian humor and sensibilities, which is usually not everyone's cup of tea, this film just feels so fun and approachable that I don't hesitate recommending it to anyone, even Tom. So if you ever see it, I would be interested in hearing what you would have to say about it.
Yeah, Orlando, My Political Biography is a really interesting documentary. I don't know if I'll necessarily recommend that to Tom first, because we are going to do a podcast eventually on why Tom hates documentaries, and I'm going to try and introduce him to some more thriller-like ones before we introduce him to something a bit more outlandish like this one. But look, what was probably most interesting about Orlando to me was the interviews with the trans people themselves. The parts where they were recreating scenes from Orlando was, sort of interesting, but I actually really liked hearing about their experiences, and possibly my favourite part of the film it was set in a psychiatrist's office, and you've got a bunch of these actors who are playing Orlando queuing up for the psychiatrist, and we see how closed-minded the psychiatrist is. We see the actors discussing how they can sort of twist words around to try and get hormones prescribed to them. One part that I actually thought was incredibly interesting is you've got a non-binary person who states that a life is not a biography or a series of episodes, and it was actually going against the grain of everybody else who was saying that Orlando was my biography. So I thought that alternative viewpoint from that person was quite interesting, because obviously it's great to have a relatable story, but a story also doesn't fully encapsulate an entire person's existence. But look, overall, I was impressed by the film. I was cautious going into it because it has, in my opinion, absolutely terrible promotional artwork, terrible movie poster that's got this dog dressed up as Orlando. And I felt really uncomfortable going like, oh crap, is this film going to be making fun of trans and non-binary people by saying that even a dog can be Orlando? But the dog dressed as Orlando is a very small part of the film. It's not a focus on there. But still, I think the film deserves better artwork. And I think with more accurate, should I say, promotional artwork, I think the film will find a wider audience, especially among people who like documentaries that do something different.
I actually quite like the post. I thought it's fun, but no, I see your point. I was really impressed by just how widely Orlando has actually been covered. Like it's been on several critic lists, including in big US publications, which I wouldn't have expected given its form. But that's really fun. So yeah, I really hope that the marketing machine, or whatever you want to call it, works a bit better, and that even more people see it, because it's something truly special. And with that, we have actually come to our number ones, the top of the podium. And we can start with you again, Saul. Which film topped all others in 2023?
My favourite film of 2023 is Poor Things. I try to come up with a creative introduction for it, but I don't think there's any way to ignore the film. People know about it. At the date of our recording, it's just won 4 Oscars, so it's very much in the know. But when I went and saw the film in December 2023, I knew almost nothing about it, and it was such a treat entering the film with zero expectations. I was trying to work out what on earth is going on with the film. You've got this medical student who's being employed by his professor to look after this young woman who's got very childlike behavior, and as the film progresses, we sort of discover why. And it would be really great if anybody listening is able to enter the film as blank as possible, because I don't know if it can be, because there's been so much publicity about it now. But yeah, I don't really actually want to say too much about it, except maybe just to say that Emma Stone is fantastic. She really, truly transforms throughout the film. Not only in the way that she walks and talks, but also the way a character visibly reacts and thinks. For me, it's possibly the strongest performance of the decade, if not the century. And great as Lily Gladstone was in Killers of the Flower Moon, I'm really glad that the Academy voters saw the correct way and decided we are going to reward this truly magnificent career best performance from Emma Stone. Beyond Emma Stone's performance, beyond the stuff that I don't want to spoil, the film just has an incredible look in there. Lots of artificial skies and sunsets provide an appropriate dreamlike quality in there. And you've got all this trademark Yorgo Lanthimos photography with fisheye lensing, which works really well because it's sort of about how somebody would maybe be perceiving the world for the first time, to be as vague about it as possible. But yeah, an incredible experience, and like Infinity Pool, it's a film that I'm hoping that when I rewatch on a small screen will be just as powerful for me.
I loved Poor Things as well. I mean, it's just been such a strong year that I couldn't fit it into my top 10, or maybe even my top 20, which is insane because I love Yorgos Lanthimos. I tend to have his films in my top 5. So I was surprised it landed as low as it did, but wow, the visuals, I agree, the central performance. You didn't mention Mark Ruffalo, which to me really managed to at least tie Emma Stone here. It was so sleazy, impish, just the charisma he had there was absolutely incredible. I was so impressed by him, and like you said, Emma Stone, just a character that's kind of has a limited inner life like that for such a portion of the film, and she just really manages to play this awakening. It's really special as well. And then the set designs and the cinematography, it was like this insane fusion of Greenaway and the Quay brothers and a bit of Guy Maddin and something else entirely, like Risas Vedas Gomez, for instance. The look was fantastic. For me, the only thing that's really holding it back was that it felt a little bit bloated, I think, and I wasn't as drawn into all of the sexual encounters. I thought that was a bit much, but I know that's one of the things selling the film, and one of the main things people thought were really important with the characters. So I'm not going to criticize that. It was just absolutely excellent. special, and the fact that it made as much money as it did, and the fact that it got nominated for Best Picture, the fact that it won awards, just gives me so much hope for film culture as well. So most of us have just great things to say about it.
Poor Things was my number 7 film of the year. So I'm really happy that Sol chose to put the spotlight on it as his number 1. It feels like a culmination of all of Lanthimos's weirdness and inventive visuals that he's been building up over the years. And whilst I still think he's yet to make his masterpiece, if he continues at this pace, there's sure to be some even more incredible films coming out of him in the future. I have to say that Mark Ruffalo for me was the standout. I agree with Chris. His character was absolutely hilarious. One of the standout scenes for me was when Emma Stone was dancing in a very weird style, and Ruffalo's character was dancing across the dance floor to try and get hold of her to rein her in, but also try to mimic her style and fit in. And there was just this perfect blend of awkwardness and style that he was trying to combine, and it was just brilliant for me. The breathtaking visuals were on point. I feel like the fisheye lens worked brilliantly, and there's clearly a lot of visual style that is inspired by Kubrick, which is why his work often gels so well with me. So yeah, I'm sure most people listening have seen The Poor Things, but if you haven't, then please watch it as soon as possible because it is such a brilliant film.
I'm really glad you guys had positive reactions to Poor Things. It has got a lot of good word of mouth, but with all films that get good word of mouth, it does get backlash also. I was a bit surprised here that you both thought that Mark Ruffalo was the standout element because, as I mentioned before, I think Emma Stone's performance is one of the best of the century so far. And even on the supporting actor front, I actually much preferred William Dafoe to Mark Ruffalo. I mean, I did like Mark Ruffalo. He was hilarious. The dancing scene that you mentioned, Tom, that was absolutely brilliant. The way that it's shot and everything. I mean, he was hilarious. They were banging his head against the table and everything. Mark Ruffalo was great. But for me, much of the emotional weight of the story lay with William Dafoe's character, and it was really sad for me. He's an actor that gets so often overlooked. Got overlooked for The Lighthouse. He's been overlooked for this one also. For me, it's one of Willem Dafoe's best performances. And yes, Chris, I understand what you're saying about the sexual encounters, and some of them were played a little bit for laughs, but I guess it is sort of essential, especially if, and I can't really get into details without spoilers, if you do actually look at Poor Things as a child abuse tale, I think all the sexual encounter stuff is incredibly important for the plot. But yeah, so many ways to dissect the film. Such a great film. I'm really glad you guys reacted to it positively also.
Yeah, I don't want to say anything negative about Willem Dafoe because I love him as an actor and he was great in Poor Things. I just thought that, essentially Mark Ruffalo just had more to work with. Like Emma Stone, he just had the more colorful, the more intense sequences and emotions, etc. But we're almost done here, so let's move on to Tom's favorite film of the year. Which film shone a light brighter than anyone else in 2023 for you, Tom?
Well, Chris, it had been some time since a film had left me absolutely devastated, and my favourite film of 2023, The Iron Claw, managed to do just that, leaving me a quivering emotional wreck. I long for this type of reaction to a film, as I love it when a story can have such a profound emotional impact on me. And although I'm not a huge fan of wrestling, or sport in general really, the tragic true life story of the Von Erich family transcends the sport with its touching take on brotherhood. It charts the highs and lows of a group of inseparable brothers who are raised by an intensely competitive and determined father as they pave their way to success in the world of professional wrestling. The onslaught of setbacks they face on the journey is relentless, and if The Iron Claw was not based on a real-life story, it would probably be considered unrealistic due to just how much tragedy the family suffers. Zac Efron is sublime in the lead role as Kevin Von Erich, with a powerhouse performance that showcases the heartbreak and devastation Kevin encounters in a nuanced fashion. Director Sean Durkin brings a confidence to his delivery that hits all the right notes you would expect to see in a biopic, but he imbues his storytelling with a flair that can be seen in his stirring montages and vibrant editing choices. My heart still aches for the Von Erich family weeks after seeing The Iron Claw, and although I want to revisit the film, I'm not sure when I will have the courage to put myself through the ringer a second time. This is a 10 out of 10 unmissable work of filmmaking. It took me totally by surprise, and I cannot recommend it enough. Make sure you see this film. How did it go for you, Chris and Sol?
The Iron Claw was a film that I was incredibly skeptical about. I know it's from A24, but it looked for me as a bit of like an Oscar baity film that failed to secure any Oscar nominations. So I was generally surprised by how great a film it was. For me, it really resonated as a tale of poor parenting and close-knit brothers who are undone by trying too hard to please the man who raised them. Zac Efron's got a lot of praise for his performance, rightly so, but Holt McCallany, for me, was probably the best performance there. From the very first scenes where he gives his sons a ranking of how much he likes them, it's very clear from early on that it's going to be about the sons wrestling, not so much with opponents, but more so the expectations of their father. In terms of what I would have liked to see the film done better, as Tom mentioned, there's a lot of tragedy that goes on with the family, and they talk a lot about a curse. And I really like films about superstition, and I guess I was hoping the film would be more about Efron's superstitions and his worries about the curse. I don't really feel that it was eating away inside him. And I guess also with so much tragedy, there was a lot to cram inside 2 hours. I guess maybe I would have preferred a longer film to sort of get everything in there. But it definitely exceeded my expectations, which is great because I'm not big into wrestling films either.
Yeah, like you saw, I thought Iron Claw was great, though I wasn't blown away as much as Tom. This is such a well-acted film, and this feels like the career best for Zac Efron. I mean, he is absolutely incredible. He lost himself in this role, and the way he manages to portray a wrestler who's clearly, shall we say, a bit lower intellect. Like you can see he's struggling to keep up with his brothers, speaking, etc. But without it becoming a caricature, and to see him kind of grow into a more confident man as well. It's such a dynamic performance of something that could have been so light. And I'm just shocked he didn't get more award buzz. I mean, this feels like a kind of role that 10, 20 years ago would have been guaranteed to at least be, if not win, at least be nominated. And the ensemble cast was wonderful as well. It was well written. I was surprised how classically directed it was in many ways, because Durkin is a director I had on my radar since he's just fantastic. Martha Marcy, May Marlene, from over a decade ago now, which was such a powerful debut. This film felt a bit more conventional, like it could actually have been made in the 70s, 80s, 90s, etc. But that didn't really stop it. It's not a negative. It has such a strong core. In terms of what brings it down a little bit for me, not very much. Like I said, it felt a little bit familiar at some point, even though it's a real story. I kind of knew where it was going and what was going to happen, which led to some of the scenes being a bit less devastating because I was just kind of expecting more tragedy. But the ending still hits so powerful. It's such a great ending, and I think it's already become iconic to the point that it's easy to be spoiled. I don't want to do that, but wow, powerful, powerful film.
Really glad that you both enjoyed this one, and I'll just add that coming from a family of three brothers, I think that's why the film resonated so well with me, particularly the ending. You know, we're lucky enough to come from a family of a loving, caring parent, so that part of the film is alien to me, but it still resonates hard, that connection that you have with your family. And I think that was handled really well with great care. And it's a film that made me want to read up more about the Von Erich family. As soon as I'd seen it, I wanted to find out more about this because I couldn't believe that everything that had happened really happened, and it did, and more awful things happened to them that couldn't be fit into the film, which, you know, is just devastating. So bring your tissues to this one, and I hope that you get as much out of it as I do.
Definitely, and it's worth noting too that it was done on a relatively low budget of just about 50 million, so credit where credit is due. And that brings us to my favorite film of the year, that was, which Tom again skipped because he does hate documentaries, and we will attack him for that in a later episode. But my number one film of the year is, this is the name I'll probably butcher again, Kothur Ben-Hanya's Four Daughters, which is one of the most powerful documentaries I have seen. It's a film that manages to use a degree of artifice in casting two of her mother's daughters who were quote-unquote taken by wolves with actresses and having a stand-in for the mother for certain scenes as the remaining two daughters and the mother start to recreate their childhood traumas and just a certain change in the air. The mother often not being able to handle the emotions of it and the stand-in taking her place. The film has quite a few pretty exciting and unique things. Most powerfully, the fact that the scenes can change from scripted to commentary or questions as actresses just become shocked by what was actually happening, not being able to keep a straight face, asking questions about how things were, how the mother could allow certain things. And it's just this kind of interplay with memories, having these people who experienced this trauma relive it and act it out, not always being able to do so. I'm really interested in memory and emotions of this kind, and just the way it did it hit me hard and was just so captivating from start to finish. There's some talking heads throughout, which I tend to not like, but it's done in a way that it doesn't feel in any way trite. It's especially interesting to look at the kind of generational trauma and complicity of the mother, who starts to be taken into account by her daughter and those around her, especially in these kind of contradictions that she has about how her daughters should live, while also lamenting what happened to her oldest two daughters, and just these thoughts of could the cycle continue further, etc. I don't want to spoil where the film goes. I didn't know the real story, and I was surprised by that. And I think that the fact that the film leaves it so late before it kind of hits in there just leaves this kind of mystery in the air as well. And when the final pieces are finally come together, it hits even harder. But yeah, just such a special experience. What did you think, Sal?
So I agree, the film does leave it quite late, what actually happened to the daughters. And the problem with me when I was watching the film is when I went into it, somebody had already spoiled it for me, and it actually said what had happened to the daughters. So I was watching the film, and I kept thinking this is incredibly interesting. You've got an actress standing in for the mother. You've got scenes where I was forgetting who's the actress and who's the mother. You've got a shot where it looks like the mother's looking in a mirror, but she's actually not. She's looking at the actress because it's just a normal glass window and the movements don't quite match up. I thought, look, there's all these interesting things going on. Why aren't I enjoying this film more? And then I realized it's because I knew where it was going and the film was taking a long time to get there. So I don't know, I might have liked the film a bit more if I didn't know where it was going to begin off with, but unfortunately for me, perhaps, I knew where it was going, and for me it didn't quite work to have all that information dropped. It's only in the last half hour. You have 75 minutes of, the recreations and the daughters bonding with the actresses, and it's only the last half hour that gets into things. And the last half hour was really, really interesting. I didn't realize, I don't want to spoil anything that I can, but, just in terms of what the mother did and how big a story it actually was, I had no idea, and I thought after, wow, it would have been really cool to sort of have that as the main focus rather than the epilogue, because it's sort of like an epilogue to the story of the actresses bonding with the real daughters. So for me, that's why the film didn't quite add up. There's a lot of interest going on, and yeah, possibly I might have had the same reaction that Chris did if I knew less going into it, but unfortunately, I didn't. So for me, it actually ended up being my least favourite of Chris's films. But then again, I haven't seen the Rado Yuta film yet. So possibly there's room for it to not be my absolute least favourite. We'll see. I mean, I did like Bad Luck Banging a lot, so I will get to the Yuta film eventually. But a 3-hour Yuta film at the moment with things going on at work at the moment, it's not something I want to sit down to after work to sort of de-stress and get my mind off things. But thanks for recommending Four Daughters to me, Chris, because it would have probably taken me a while to get around to it without your recommendation.
And no worries, and I'm glad you enjoyed it, especially the last half hour. And I partially agree that I think that last half hour is really hard-hitting and special. So it really just comes down to how much you care about the journey getting there. And I think that if that part had been spoiled for me, maybe I would have been in a similar situation as you. I hope not, because I really just enjoy the journey. And you know me, I love these Brechtian techniques. You can see that throughout most of my picks as well. And just this interplay between the actresses and the real family, and the way they were just questioning these memories and living with these memories, and just all of the different ways, the different emotion that made me feel. I thought that was really, really powerful. Maybe you'll feel differently on a rewatch eventually, who knows? But still, really glad you enjoyed it. I hope Tom will, if he ever watches it. But again, he hates documentaries, and that's an episode that will come soon.
Yeah, that's a conversation for another day. So I am sorry that I didn't see your number 1 and 2, Chris, but maybe sometime I'll come round to them. We'll see.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe after we roast you in our forthcoming episode. It's going to be a bit of a wait for us because we haven't even recorded it yet, but we're scheduling it in, and there will be a full episode of us roasting Tom. So stay tuned. And with that, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed our discussion. Feel free to come to the thread dedicated to this episode, share your own favorites, comment on our favorites, and of course, settle the question of which film was more stressful, Fem or Last Night of Amore. And with that, thank you once again for tuning in, and join us again soon.
You have been listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com.